Good evening. I'm Mary Yusong Callan, co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Rochester metro area. The League is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We influence public policy through education and advocacy, and we focus significant effort on registering new voters. If you're not registered to vote, by the way, or if you've moved since the last election, please stop by our table. We'll be happy to register you to vote, so you'll be all set for November 3rd. By the way, the League of Women Voters is not limited to women only. Men are most welcome to join us in making democracy work. On behalf of the members of the Rochester League, I'd like to welcome you to our September Forum, for which we have invited a stellar panel to help us answer the question, why don't we vote? Dr. Timothy Nealon received his PhD from the University of Oklahoma. He's been teaching and writing on American, national, state, and local politics for 3 decades. In addition to his work at Nazareth College, where he's taught courses on American history and politics since 2000, Dr. Nealon is a political analyst for local media. His publications include studies of Presidents Millard Fillmore, Franklin Roosevelt, and George H.W. Bush, as well as works on mental health history and policy. He recently completed a reference book explaining social policy differences between Democrats and Republicans, and he is currently completing revisions to a book-length study of Richard Nixon's natural disaster policy. We also welcome Dr. Andrea Kane. She received her doctorate in executive leadership from St. John Fisher College and recently completed her Master in Business Administration degree. She's worked in not-for-profit organizations for over 17 years, currently serving as Vice President and Interim CEO of the Community Place of Greater Rochester. She is also an adjunct professor for Empire State and St. John Fisher Colleges. She sits on the board of Stepping Stones Learning Center and is the chair of its evaluation committee. Finally, she's a member of the JDAI committee for Monroe County and is also a founding board member for a new and up-and-coming organization called Step Up to Your Future, a mentoring program for young women here in Rochester. We welcome George H. Moses, who has a proven history of leadership and guidance and service with a strong commitment and involvement at all levels in the Rochester community. He's a product of the Rochester City School District and graduated from Monroe Community College, where he served as Vice President for Legislative Advocacy for the American Student Association of Community Colleges. He has been with the Northeast Area Development Incorporated since 1998 and currently serves as Executive Director of both NEAD and Group 14621. We are proud to present this panel discussion, and we're especially pleased to be able to offer a question and answer segment following the presentations. We request, of course, that all our guests respect our panel, our hosts, and the League's own commitment to civil and respectful discourse. Please join me in welcoming our panel.
Thanks so much.
Is there a light?
We are having some lighting difficulties here. Unfortunately, we've checked with the maintenance staff.
Okay.
This is what we can do. Sorry.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And as we're waiting for the PowerPoint to boot up. Look, so here's the question. Why don't people vote? And really, more to the point, what can we do about this? Really, we're not here tonight just to lament the lack of voter turnout, although we'll talk about that, because that will reveal, I think, the roots of the problem. But we also want to talk about, at the end, what are some ways that we can change the system? And when we talk about voter turnout, normally political scientists and others use the number of people eligible to vote, right? Not registered voters, which is a different number, but people eligible to vote, but who do not. And in part they do that because of the problems of figuring out registration and who should register. So, but even by any measure, voting turnout is very low. Now, good news is, over the last 200-odd years, the number of people eligible to vote has increased. The 15th Amendment, African American men over the age of 21, 19th Amendment women, 23rd Amendment, people who live in the District of Columbia, and of course the 26th Amendment, 18-year-olds. The caveat on African American men, though, is upwards of 13% of African American males are denied the right to vote because they are incarcerated or have committed a felony, and many states, 2/3 of the states, have laws that take away your voting rights if you have been convicted of a felony. And that's an issue that needs to be addressed. But I want to point out that when we talk about the low turnout, that you can see from this chart that even as we've expanded the electorate, the number of people participating has declined. And it's declined fairly steadily since the late 19th century. So what's going on? What is making people less interested in voting? It's at the national level. If you look at turnout, midterms, the midterm elections, those elections held for Congress, for the 1/3 of the Senate and all members of the House, which occurs in between presidential elections, turnout last year, or in 2014 I should say, was the lowest since the 1940s. Now that's significant because that was a dramatic election following, right, the presidential election, following the resurgence of the Republicans in 2010. You would have thought that would have brought a lot of people out to vote, but it didn't. But it's not just our national offices, it's our state offices. Look at that. If you look at the green line, that's New York City voting. Look at how high it was in the 1950s, the percentage of people who are voting in New York City. That's gone down. And we can say the same thing about most big cities everywhere in America. Even as we passed the Voting Rights Act in 1965, even as we fought to make sure that we had voter registration and took away those barriers that kept people from voting, we continue to see a decline in voting everywhere. Now, we're definitely concerned about that. Here, we're especially concerned about Rochester, though. Rochester is where we live, where we can make a real difference on politics in the county, and those differences are vital to people. Will we have money for daycare, for working single parents? Will we allocate our resources towards schools or cultural resources? What are we going to spend our money on? Are we going to spend it on attracting more corporations that might provide more jobs? These are the differences between Republicans and Democrats, and these are differences that make a difference for every single person in Monroe County, even though they don't think it does. What reasons people did not vote? U.S. Census Bureau said, okay, they do these in between the annual census. They ask questions. They send questionnaires out to households, and they ask, well, why didn't you vote? I was too busy. You were too busy to vote. Well, okay, maybe they were. How long are polling places open outside of New York State? Now, in New York, they're open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. on major elections. During primaries, however, they're not. And that is an issue. I was listening to Evan Dawson's show today, and somebody called and complained. Well, I went to my polling place, but it was closed until noon. I was working at noon, and I had an appointment after work, so I wasn't able to vote. Those are simple changes. They'll require money. They'll require some resources. Not interested in voting. Well, that gets into questions about whether or not you think change is possible in politics. That's a very important issue. Illness and disability, well, that can be because they don't allow people to vote absentee ballots. Absentee ballots have to be mailed out a week before the election, or they have to be hand-delivered the day before the election in New York State, and some states are even more draconian about it. We've talked about early voting patterns in different places around the country, but early voting is not always as simple. Again, out of town, forgot to vote. Okay, that can happen. Although, with the ubiquitousness of social media, I voted today. That's a little harder, but if you don't have the internet and you're staying at home and you don't read a newspaper and you don't go outside, you could, in fact, I suppose, forget to vote. Again, particularly if you were in a state that did not have generous hours like ours. I have to say that I've lived in many states in my life, and New York State has some very generous election hours. But they could be more generous. 24-hour voting. You laugh, but you know, the lifestyle the way it is, Wegmans is open 24 hours. Why shouldn't election voting be open for 24 hours? People have different lifestyles. Just like the candidates or issues. Okay, I can't help you much on the candidates. I'm not in charge of that. But the more people vote, that can change the political process. The more you vote for alternate parties and take votes away from the major parties, the more those parties are going to co-opt those issues. Green Party voting in 2000 directly affected the way both Republicans and Democrats have dealt with climate change. Now, to some extent, Republicans have gone one way, denying climate change for a large extent, and the Democrats have embraced it because they realize that those people who are leaning green will be more likely to vote for them. But that's what a third party or minor party can do. Registration problems, all right, that could be an issue. Inconvenient polling place could be an issue. Transportation problems. Although most political parties still provide rides, you can call up and get rides. People may not be aware of that. We need an Uber app for polling, right? Something, because people will use that. That's what we need. Bad weather conditions, believe it or not, political scientists for years have said, you know, that will keep people from voting. I can't do much about that. We do vote, you know, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November in most races. Other reasons, don't know or refuse to answer. But I think these are fairly honest assessments of why people who are registered don't vote. But we have a number of people who are not voting, who are consistently not voting. And they're young. They're young and they tend to be more racially and ethnically diverse than the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who have dominated electoral politics through much of American history. They feel alienated and disaffected. They are less affluent. Most voters are making, non-voters are making less than $30,000 a year. When you make over $70,000, you're much more likely to participate. So, questions of income gaps, questions about poverty, questions about social services. I hear a lot of talk in politics about capital gains taxes. All right, I work for a living. I'm not going to be affected by that. So I don't know how that could interest me in a candidate. Maybe if they were talking about issues such as minimum wage and redistribution of some social services, that might get people to vote. And they would vote against as well as for, by the way. Right? Because you'd have people who would be concerned about redistribution policies who would come out to vote. They would still get people to come out and vote and take part in the political process. But again, this is a great metric. So this comes out of the Census Bureau about people who are not voting. So we're somehow missing the outreach to the community that needs to be empowered the most, the community whose issues do not get to the top of the list. And there's several other reasons why, right? Why people don't register to vote. Nothing ever gets done. I would just say to them, you're talking about the Affordable Care Act, nothing ever gets done. That was a tremendous change because one political party took both the White House and they had control of Congress, the House, during that time period. Again, maybe you hate the Affordable Care Act. But that's still a major policy issue that's affecting every single American. That's tremendous change. And again, we can drill it down closer. Things do get done. Sometimes they get done to you, and then you become alienated, disaffected. But the trick is then to push back by voting. Politics is too corrupt. Okay, yes, politics is corrupt. I heard someone call Evans a radio show today, and they said, you know, I think politics is corrupt to the core. Well, I hate to tell you, everyone, but every single institution in America is corruption in it. The church, higher education, K-12 education, business. I can't think of any institution that has somehow escaped corruption because human beings are corrupt. But that's a convenient excuse not to vote, to lie still in your cynicism. And again, how do we root out corruption in other places? We expose it. We put people in jail. We do the same thing in politics, good heavens. I mean, the federal prosecutors in Albany, they've been really busy lately. So don't, I mean, even if there is corruption, it doesn't mean we should just bow out of the system. No difference between Democrats and Republicans. Tax policy is a tremendous issue for people who have a fixed income. Where do your tax dollars go? What are services being provided for you? For people who need social services, are they being provided? We just celebrated, that's a wrong word, I guess acknowledged, that's a better word, the 10th anniversary of Katrina, right? Think about who got left in New Orleans. Who didn't have transportation out? Okay, the poor, the infirm, right? And presumably everyone's done a better job of preparing for that, but that's politics. Those are policy differences, right? There are differences between the way Democrats and Republicans look at almost every issue. Again, and that has got to be acknowledged. And it doesn't make a difference in my life. And then there's a great cartoon from the 90s about people being cynical and tuning out. Well, people have always been cynical and tuned out. Now, what do political scientists say? All right, nice political cartoon, laugh at the academics, go ahead, yeah. Thursday night, let me just say, I had an alumni event. I brought 3 of my former students back. The oldest graduated in 2004, so they've been out about 11 years. All 3 of them are in public service. All 3 of them are working their butts off to make a difference. And they're not getting paid a lot. One is a Republican, one is a Democrat, and one is a major in the United States Air Force. This is the difference you can make. Don't tell me it doesn't make a difference. Everything's all corrupt. Now, why? Political scientists will say something's happened in American politics over the last couple of decades. We are more polarized than ever. And study after study shows that Democrats are more partisan when it comes to social issues, and Republicans are more partisan when it comes to social issues, and we have this tremendous divide that cannot be closed. Where are the moderates, people are asking, or where are the compromisers? Where are the people that can get things done? Well, that's true. That's true. And in some ways, that has also nationalized our local elections. And sometimes you find people in local elections talking about issues that are national, or sometimes you'll see commercials saying, you know, our local candidate for the assembly once shook the hand of Hillary Clinton. They must be a fiendish liberal. Or this candidate once stood in front of a poster of Ronald Reagan. They must be a fiendish conservative, right? You see these negative campaigns and a lack of real policy discussion. Voters don't always see deep discussion. The last presidential GOP debate, what did they talk about? Foreign policy. The key issue for all voters, irrespective of their ideological bent, is the economy. And much of that debate was about foreign policy. Now, granted, the media is somewhat to blame for that because they're the ones that ask the questions. They're the ones that ask the questions. And since we're going to bash the media now, how many times have you heard a story about the election and it's about the horse race? So we have this debate, they talk about some issues. What was interesting about that debate is they actually debated each other. They kind of looked at each other and said, well, I disagree with you on this, that, or the other thing. And yet, what's the headline the next day? How is Fiorina doing in the polls? Well, ladies and gentlemen, as political scientists, I can tell you the polls mean nothing right now. Nothing right now. They're all over the place. They will continue to be all over the place. right now, if you really want to find some sort of polling predictor, there's been since the late 80s, early 90s, this thing they call the market indicator. People actually put money in to bet on the candidate they think is going to be the winner. And that has been much more effective than any polling data. The last cycle, presidential cycle, guess what? The people leading in August, in September, were not the people who got the nomination. So, if Mr. Trump is your hero or Mr. Trump is your nightmare, I wouldn't worry about it right now. It's all going to be okay. Now, on the other hand, that could mean politics as usual, guys. And media and voting behavior. We're not even watching the same television anymore. And we know that Democrats watch certain kinds of television and Republicans watch others. So we're polarizing our information. And of course then political ads are targeting those groups. But you know what's more interesting to me is that the more time you spend watching television, the less likely you are to vote. But there has been a relationship, a correlation between that for years. Now, I think we can extrapolate to social media, but I haven't seen any good research data on that, so I have to be careful and cautious on that. But, you know, the people who aren't voting tend to be 34 and younger, and every time students leave a class on the Nazareth campus, they're all bent over doing this with their phones. Every single one of them. They cannot wait to get back on their phones. Now, I'm fortunate that they stay off their phones for the most part in class. But it's a changing world. Political scientists would also say, hey, political parties are no longer strong. They used to recruit people to run for office. They used to do a lot more with voter registration. They used to do a lot more voter engagement and outreach. They're doing much less now. Political parties are weakening, and one of the ways that we can see that is what we call de-alignment. More people are choosing to leave their registration forms blank in New York State, or independent, I suppose. They're not joining a political party. It doesn't mean they're not affiliated, but it does mean that they're not joining a party. And one of the things we know as political scientists is that there's a strong correlation between party identification and voting. Whether you like partisanship or not, one of the reasons we had 90% of people voting in the late 1800s is because political parties were so powerful. And yet, if you look at Congress just flipping back and forth between the two political parties much more frequently in those days. So it's really fascinating. Voter registration. Now this is where Tom's going to be. Now Tom's a great man. He's one of the co-chairmen of the Monroe County Board of Elections. Don't hate me for this. But there's a couple of things. I mean, most voters are required to register within a certain time before election. New York State, it's 25 days out. So you have to register 25 days out. The absentee, we talked about the absentee ballot. Now, you can register online, but not really. Because you got to own a car, or be somehow have a driver's license through the DMV. And you go to the Board of Elections site, and they're not going to take you right there. You have to go to the DMV site. So essentially, to register to vote in New York State, you better have a form, use blue or black ink, make sure you sign it. It would be better and easier if you had a Social Security card or a driver's license number to prove your identity. And I gotta say, New York does one of the best jobs of not having barriers to registration. And it's not it's not the Board of Elections' fault, it's the way the laws are written. But think about that, you're a college student or someone who has not been paying a great deal of attention, and now you want to register to vote and they're telling you it's too late. You gotta wait 4 more years to vote in a presidential election, 2 more years in a congressional election, and maybe 4 more years for a local election. That can alienate voters. There's language barriers, accessibility barriers, and understaffed polling sites. And again, I don't think New York State suffers from these as much. All right, we don't have the long lines where judges have to order voting place sites to stay open an extra hour or 2. But that can alienate voters as well, because everyone's time is valuable. And they are giving their civic duty, and then you're saying to them, well, we didn't want to put that much money into the election, so we didn't hire more people or open up more voting sites, because we really don't, I mean, essentially you're saying we really don't want you to vote. We want you to stay home so we can keep the status quo politics. 31 states require some sort of voter ID. 9 of these states require government-issued photo ID. New York State does require you to sign, You have to come in and they can match your signature. So again, that's not difficult, but it can be a barrier. It can be a barrier. All right, so what can we do? All right, so this is my pitch. This is how we're going to go leave this room and we're going to make this world a better place. All right, are you with me? Same-day registration. Same-day registration. I know, the Republicans will say, fraud, 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 fraud. Yes, they will. And they will be against this. And I understand. I think voter fraud is horrible. I think anybody who commits voter fraud intentionally, throw the key away. Bingo. Right? I think, but on the other hand, we have a criminal justice system that says you're innocent until proven guilty. In voting, we say, well, you're guilty until you prove to us you're innocent, right? So we don't want you, same-day registration. We should increase this, and studies have found that this would probably influence the number of people who would register and vote. Actually allow online registration for all voters. 50-state registration. If you can nationalize elections through the Help America Vote Act, why can't you nationalize the registration process and take down all barriers and make online registration a thing? So that one national form, one key insight. Yes, I understand about federalism. I teach about it all the time. But, particularly when it comes to elections dealing with House, the Senate, and the presidency, the Constitution kind of says that Congress has some authority in setting things like when the election is. So, and they've already done in the Help America Vote Act, they came up with new ways to encourage us to change our voting patterns. Hold elections on weekends. You're too busy? Have an election on a weekend. And for years I've heard, well, the veterans won't like that because it's too close to Veterans Day, you might take away Veterans Day. I've never heard any employee complain about having an extra day off, right? So, you know, I make sure Veterans Day is still a thing, create weekend voting, create 24-hour voting. Make it as simple as possible. If you don't want to do it on a weekend because you're worried, well, the churches are going to be, you know, the Christian churches are going to be busy that day, and we do a lot of elections in churches. Well, we also do elections in schools, and, you know, it doesn't seem to be. We could find places to hold elections, but that's a problem, then make Election Day a holiday. Encourage early voting. Make it easy to vote before Election Day. Just encourage people to vote, so that way they can't forget. And then again, we're going to hear fraud, 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 fraud. Well, both political parties have spent a lot of time getting people to vote early, so they would definitely have those votes. Spend more money to ensure that we have sufficient polling sites and access. I mean, if we have one person, one vote, we should have some sort of criteria for the population that votes in a particular polling site. So we're not having these long lines and crowds. What can we do? Well, we can do voter registration. We can't change the rules tonight, but tomorrow is National Voter Registration Day. And I know that the League is going to be in Brockport and MCC, I think. That's right. Nazareth College is going to register our young people tomorrow and all week to try to encourage people to vote. But there's other things. Where you work. Yeah, you know, the Board of Elections has this cool website. You can download these forms. They're pretty cheap to print off, and we can just bring some in, encourage people to vote. Send reminders about when and where elections are held. Now, there are some apps that do this already. The Board of Elections does a great job. They, in fact, they check your address because they send you information telling you, all right, so, you know, in case, you know, your election site has moved, here's some information. They're also checking to make sure you really live where you say you live. It's brilliant. It's beautiful. Love it. It gets, you know, so no fraud. We had to demonstrate why elections matter. Okay, you have to point, and you could even point to something like, well, okay, so politics under Tom Richards versus politics under Lovely Warren. Right? There is going to be a different emphasis, and that's just within a political party. Candidates matter. Candidates matter. Once a person votes once, they're more likely to vote again. If you can get someone to vote, the problem is if they stop voting, they're less likely to vote. So you gotta try to get the discouragement out. Connect would-be voters with candidates and issues, because for a variety of reasons that's not happening in the media, the political parties are less successful at this than they were before. The League does a terrific job. They invite people out. They hold forums. Dr. Kane's going to talk about what she does to help voter education. But again, there's other things we can do, encourage the people around us. You're here tonight, you're influencers. You're the people that can influence your 10 friends to make a difference and to get people to register or to vote or to come out for this. And some of you might even think about running for office. Here's the tricky thing. You don't have to win to make a difference. Sometimes the most brilliant campaigns are the ones where the candidate loses but makes a difference because they scare the power structure. They make people think twice. They get them to spend a little more time in their communities and neighborhoods. So that's my little soapbox for tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kane, and I'm going to pick it up.
I don't have a PowerPoint. I just have some bullet points. But I wanted to speak to you from the perspective of some of the people that we serve at the community place of Greater Rochester.
well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry about that. I said I wanted to speak to you from the perspective of some of the individuals that we serve at the community place of Greater Rochester. Every year, and we have something called Candidates Night, where we invite people from the neighborhoods that we serve, and across Monroe County as well, to come out to meet the candidates. Really get to know who's running for office, why they're running for office, why it's important, and why it's important for them to get out and vote. We help with trying to get them registered to vote as well. And we really encourage them to become as educated as possible because depending upon their circumstances, voting and getting the right people in office is really should be one of their priorities. But part of knowing what the priorities are for them, it's really important for you to know like who these people are and how to connect with them to encourage them to vote. I think one of the big issues that we recognize is we serve people in the Crescent area in Rochester, and 60% of the people or residents in that area live in poverty. That's not to say that poor people don't vote, people who are living in poverty don't vote. It's that some people might think that voting doesn't make a difference for them, as Dr. Nealon has stated. There's several issues that people in that community talk about when they come and they get to socialize with the actual candidate or a representative from their office, and these are some of the things, the feedback that we get from our surveys on, again, when they're leaving, are you going to vote? Did you register? Now understanding who's running for office. Tell me why you think you'll go out and vote this time. One of the biggest things that we see on some of our surveys is that politicians really ignore the poor because they think that the poor don't vote. And that's not true. Many of those people in the community feel like, you know, why should I go out and vote if it's not going to make a difference? Some of them have really no firsthand knowledge of the difference between voting for the president and voting for someone locally in office. They have no idea about the impact that it could have if they vote someone on